Welcome to The Hill's Coronavirus Report. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Each day we are interviewing consequential leaders in the battle against the coronavirus. Almost immediately after the genome of the COVID-19 virus was sequenced and published in a way that research institutions, universities, and private pharmaceutical firms could have full access, scientists have sought therapeutics and vaccines to attack the virus and improve survival rates of the ravages of COVID-19. Pfizer, as one of the leading pharmaceutical research engines in the world, has identified a potential vaccine which has showed some promise in the preclinical phase. Because of the urgent need for such a vaccine, the projected delivery has gone from the end of the year to sometime later this summer. And actually, I could say most times these kinds of vaccines take years to develop. Human trials are expected later this month. The hope is that millions of vaccines will be in supply by the end of this year. Officials at Pfizer laud the efforts that are on track now to take just about half the time that the 18-month development to market phase once predicted. Mikael Dolsten is Chief Scientific Officer and President of Worldwide Research, Development, and Medical with Pfizer, where his primary focus is small molecule medicines, biotherapeutics, gene therapies, and vaccines. Mikael, welcome. It's great to have you here. You and I have chatted in the past about the very rich environment of science and brilliant minds and challenges within the pharmaceutical ecosystem. And I'm just wondering right now, just give us the bottom line on what you think that pharmaceutical world can produce in this COVID challenge.
Thank you, Steve, for inviting me and Pfizer to share some of our thoughts on this unique opportunity to come together in the ecosystem between industry, federal agencies, academia to take on this vicious virus. It's only been some 4 months or so since the virus emerged with a new disease that didn't have a name before, as it didn't exist. And I must say it's been a tremendous rally of science and progress to provide hope that what looks like difficult trouble and time can be combated to get back as close as we can to a new normal. And I think right now I'm very encouraged by progress in both vaccines, therapeutics, and look forward to share some of this promise and the underlying data with you.
Well, I'm interested right now in how the system is changing. I know that you met the President of the United States with some other research scientists and heads of pharmaceutical firms at the beginning of March, and you wrote about this in Forbes. And I think that, you have a normal process, you have, clinical trials, you have, there's just sort of a calendar challenge in dealing with this. But I think I've read that you're optimistic that we're changing that, speeding things up in very historic ways.
Yeah, I think given that we have such a new challenge, it's been an opportunity to explore new, more transparent ways to work together. And I think it's inspired the dialogues we have with the regulatory agency to be more facilitating, while at the same time they want to ensure that the process incorporates the best advice for safe and effective vaccines or medicines. But I think it's moving to a level where we jointly look at the needs of the patient, and as the clock is ticking, trying to make months to weeks, weeks to days, and days to hours. And between companies, we're looking at ways to create a transparent sharing of experiences to learn quicker together. And that has been very stimulating, this reset of the system.
I know that you have a partnership that you've announced, I think it's called BioNTech, on a potential vaccine. I know you've been working on antivirals as well and across different parts of the spectrum, if you will, in dealing with this. Can you, speaking to a lay audience, not a scientific audience, give us some idea of the various initiatives that Pfizer has in place now?
Yeah, at the onset of this pandemic, our CEO, Albert Bourla, defined a 5-point plan to stimulate the way we work together in the ecosystem and how Pfizer can contribute and bring forward its capability, experiences, its resources. And one part included for us to leverage the 2 years experience we had with the German biotech company BioNTech in bringing forward a new technology that's more rapid and agile and particularly suitable to address viruses that either emerge fast, like the SARS-CoV-2, and also may change unexpectedly. And this is the technology that we then expanded our original flu partnership into a COVID-19 partnership to advance rapidly. And I'm pleased to say that we announced this morning in a press release that our partnership got approved in Germany for starting clinical trials with its novel mRNA vaccine technology against COVID-19. And we expect them to start shortly and even imminently in Germany. And at the same time, we are filing the requirement to start similar studies in the US, and they will be very much going hand in hand. So that's the story about the vaccine, and I'm happy to add more texture also to the antiviral.
In the article that you wrote in Forbes, you shared a historical analogy that I hadn't thought of, which was about penicillin and the British government and the American government, again, at that moment of great need before and during World War II, of saying we needed to bring this on, we needed to scale in ways they hadn't done. And I'm just interested in that analogy. Where does that analogy fit today? And maybe where doesn't it? How is penicillin and what we achieved back then different than what we are trying to do today?
Yeah, I think, while crises like this are extremely unfortunate and sad for all those that suffer, I think sometimes they can, stimulate, catalyze that we find new ways of overcoming obstacles because of the devastating threat we are facing. And if you look at many tens of thousands of casualties and the much larger passing 1 million of infected people, I think it forced us to think outside the box, how we can come together and make sure that we learn quick and find new ways to bring vaccine and therapeutics. And I wanted to actually punctuate, a statement by the CDC director Redfield yesterday that while we feel that we have had a tremendous hard time the last few months, we need to take that learning and be prepared. It may be a similar, who knows, even bigger challenge as the flu seasons this fall will break in maybe September, October. And what if the SARS-CoV-2 virus bounces back, which is highly likely it will not be expelled by that time because there is no vaccine. And I think exactly the same kind of plan was emerging in our, preparations here, that we want to move swiftly against SARS-CoV-2 now, but we can't wait to have a credible and documented with safety and efficacy vaccine no later than October, when we may be hit by multiple vaccines. And that enabled us to rather go backwards to say, if we are to have a vaccine, at least in millions of doses to protect people in the greatest need by October, what needs to happen every week until then? And that's the type of dialogue we've had with the US and German regulators. And I think, this moonshot allow us to find new ways together. And I'm optimistic that even though nobody thought it would be possible and everyone said it will take 12 to 18 months at least, we now have a plan that's about half that time. And I think pending, positive outcome in clinical studies, pending productive regulatory dialogue, there is a plan that could, with a mix of extremely hard work and no harm to have some luck, could enable you to have a solution that could expel the virus from the public society and bring back the confidence for those in greatest need that they may be protected. And that's really what we're working with at the moment.
But Michael, let me ask you a question. So the world's eyes, and particularly Americans' eyes, are going to be on this ecosystem and what is produced. And they're going to be asking some big questions when you discover that miracle and we do have antivirals and a vaccine. And questions that have been plaguing this ecosystem for a while have been accessibility and pricing. And when we get to that point, what are your thoughts on accessibility of this drug to those who need it and the pricing questions? Because sometimes there's a debate about how open you make this, because this research costs money. This research, there are failures, but then there's a debate about accessibility and pricing.
Yeah, I think accessibility for all patients in need globally is very important for us. It's always important for us, but of course, with a pandemic, it puts this at the edge. So while we think there is a way forward to spend at risk before we have clinical data, manufacturing and R&D resources to be able to have millions of doses in October, that's just to help those that are most vulnerable to the virus, the frontline people of society, and those that suffer from other diseases that make them fragile. So we think about bringing our resources together, and I think it was a sign of this partnership that we're working with a cutting-edge biotech on the technology, but Pfizer's experience going all the way to penicillin that you started out with, and over many, many decades to master its manufacturing network across the globe, and with other partners to be able to think about hundreds of millions and even billions of doses. And I welcome the ecosystem to have more than one vaccine because we face this global pandemic. But it's really our vision here to step it up from millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions and even billions as we gather the experience and the momentum in this effort. And that's the only way to bring back something that looks at least somewhat like we used to call a normal day, although I think this pandemic, the biggest in a century for us, will change the world, but hopefully some aspect of what was normal when it comes to social networking, when it comes to be able to go in a grocery, when it comes to be able for patients to go to an emergency room, when it comes to how an intensive care unit looks like, that feeling of somewhat a touch of normal can only be brought back by the vaccine. Therapeutic can help us to not feel that when we enter into an emergency setting, the risk of fatal outcome is dramatic, but rather that we see there are numerous opportunities for physicians and nurses to bring back health to us. And that's why those two tools are so important to move hand in hand together. And we engage in both of them together with many different partners in the ecosystem.
Michael, in our last minute or so, I'm interested in your insights. You've been in this for a long time on illusions that we should be careful of. Now, I don't know if they're illusions, but this week we saw an NIH report that the hydroxychloroquine study with mixing azithromycin has not panned out, that it did not have a demonstrable effect on those patients. We also have a debate going on in this country about reopening and how we reopen, and there's a tug of war between those who want to look at the economic life of the nation and then others that are looking at the health of citizens. And so I'm interested in the illusions and blind spots that you can tell in this last minute that we ought to be cautious of.
Yeah, I think to really change the threat to public health, it's only vaccines and therapeutics that in the end can do that. But as we think about the threat and how we spend our life between that moment and now, it's always important to retain hope that we will be able to change this current very difficult times, that science will win. That's important to keep that hope, but to navigate cautiously. And I think, the balance between not having a collapsing business and unemployment versus ensuring that we don't lose tens of thousands of lives, it's a delicate path. And I just encourage that there is a broad participation of all the necessary voices to make those difficult decisions. And, when I was at the White House, I was really encouraged that we were, some 20 different experts around the table. And that's my only advice, to continue inclusiveness in views and make sure that all the aspects of science, societal sciences, and the business aspect of keeping society going is with equal balance put in the final decision. And I do think it's important to think about today and move cautiously. I think rapid changes from work at home to suddenly see people at restaurants and shops in kind of the historical way that life was pursued, that would not be a good way. But there may be midpoints where you can keep social distancing, where you can keep careful opening up of certain sectors in certain regions while monitoring through testing the trend and being willing to say, we are moving cautiously and constantly incorporating scientific, medical, and other social sciences into navigating through this crisis, while the solution of a vaccine is the only way to get to a world where we can come back more to normal life. And therapeutic is what the physicians and patients need at the hospital. So while this wasn't a perfect one guiding principle, I think it reflects that cautious moves and constantly taking feedback from the environment and progress in science. Our contribution here is to accelerate the science and continue to give promise that in October we'll start to have one or several vaccines that could be part of the changing society. And I hope at the same time point, or even earlier, therapeutic will help those in the greatest need. So Steve, I hope that gave you a bit of a sense. There is urgency and there is progress.
Well, I wish you well, and I wish your pharmaceutical siblings well in finding that vaccine, finding those antivirals. It's so important. I want to thank Mikael Dolsten, the Chief Scientific Officer of Pfizer, for joining us today and sharing this important slice of this era. Thank you for joining me today. Hope to see you tomorrow. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.